Greetings and salutations. This is Almighty Christopher Daniels, sometimes known as the Fallen Angel, but always known as the greatest wrestler in the world. Your mom's favorite wrestler, your dad's favorite wrestler, the world's favorite wrestler. I'm also a paragon of virtue, an inspiration to children everywhere, and the man with the rear that makes the girls cheer. And while you're watching me, I'm telling you, you're also watching Top 10 Wrestling, so congratulations.
In my last video, I looked at Vince Russo's worst ideas and decisions during his stints in TNA Creative. I want to say thank you guys because that video has got so much support, and I said that if you guys wanted it, that I would do a video, the same thing, the same topic, but except with Hulk Hogan, talking about his worst decisions and worst ideas during his time in TNA, and you guys clearly wanted to see it, so here we are. The era in which Hulk Hogan was in power in TNA is argued by many to be the worst era of TNA and the start of the company's downfall. My name is Tom of Thompson Wrestling, and today we're going to be looking at the worst things Hulk Hogan did while in TNA. But before we do get into it, be sure to subscribe with notifications on and like the video. Do both those things right now. Literally, do it right now. But let's get right into the video. Let's start off by talking about the signings that were made. While Hogan was in charge, many people were signed to the company, many of whom were former WWE wrestlers, including but not limited to Jeff Hardy, Ric Flair, Mickie James, Rob Van Dam, Mr. Anderson, Shannon Moore, Orlando Jordan, Scott Hall, X-Pac, Brian Kendrick, Tommy Dreamer, etc, etc. But there are three signings that Hulk Hogan made that were the worst signings he could have possibly made that I'm going to talk about now. There's a former WWE singles wrestler, a former WWE tag team, and an awful backstage interviewer to talk about. So let's start with the latter, that man being Bubba the Love Sponge. Bubba the Love Sponge was not only a waste of space, but a massive arsehole. I'm not going to talk about him for too long, as I already have an entire standalone video detailing his time in the company, but basically, for a too long didn't read, he was a guy who was only signed because he was best mates with Hulk Hogan. He was a radio host who had absolutely nothing to do with wrestling prior to signing with TNA. He only lasted 3 months in the company during a time where he was under lots of fire due to comments he made about the Haiti earthquakes on his radio show. He was also beaten up by Awesome Kong, punched in the nose by Mick Foley, and was ultimately fired on April 30th, 2010. He also played a part in why Awesome Kong left the company, so here's a middle finger for robbing TNA of one of their best women's wrestlers of all time. Now let's talk about Sean Morley, aka Val Venus. He debuted for TNA on January 4th, 2010 on their first Monday episode with the gimmick of an adult film producer. Now, he was severely out of shape, severely bland, and way past his prime, and pretty much just a bit of a has-been, and shouldn't really be in TNA. He began a feud with Christopher Daniels of all people, and the two faced off at Genesis in Morley's first match for the company. So you have Sean Morley, aka Val Venus, a guy who was never really that big in WWE or never really that popular, who is now way older, out of shape, and not in his prime, who's now in TNA. And then you have Christopher Daniels, a man who has been in TNA since the very beginning, played numerous characters and made all of them work, and in general was very good and just worked his arse off for the company. So what do? They have Val Venus beat him live on pay-per-view. It was one of the most out of touch decisions I've ever seen from any wrestling company ever. And Sean Morley would leave the company just 2 months later, so what on earth was really the point in all of it? And the final signing to talk about, the Nasty Boys, a team who were never even good in WWE. So why Hulk Hogan thought they would be any better when they were now in their mid-40s and severely out of shape is absolutely just beyond me. They too debuted on the first Monday episode of TNA on January 4th, 2010. They feuded with Team 3D, aka the Dudley Boys, and beat them live on pay-per-view. Yes, this happened in 2010. The Nasty Boys and the Dudley Boys. And just like Val Venus, they were out the door in March already. Supposedly, the Nasty Boys were released following an incident with a Spike TV executive at a TNA function, but details have remained unknown what actually happened. I mean, the fact that the Nasty Boys defeated Team 3D, arguably one of TNA's greatest tag teams ever, shows that maybe TNA had plans for the Nasty Boys. So let's count our blessings and be very thankful they were gone before any of those potential plans came into fruition. Alright, we've talked about all the signings that Hulk Hogan made while in TNA, but let's talk about the next worst thing that Hulk Hogan did in TNA, and that was he made the show completely about him. Not only was Hulk Hogan working behind the scenes, pulling all the strings, but he also became prominent on-screen character and authority figure, with many storylines revolving around him, and he opened too many episodes of Impact and pay-per-views. As well as this, he also wrestled. He wrestled matches against the likes of Sting, Ric Flair and AJ Styles in a tag match, Aces and Eights, which is just mental to think about. I mean, Hulk Hogan vs Sting itself was a singles match and was one of the main event matches for Bound for Glory 2011. Key words, 2011. This is not WCW in 1999. This is TNA in 2011, and this match is happening. As well as this, Hogan also gave many opportunities to people who he was close with, people such as Bob the Love Sponge and the Nasty Boys who I mentioned earlier. I cannot see any reasons why those guys would have been signed other than the fact that they were buddy-buddy with Hulk Hogan. And of course, we can't forget his daughter Brooke Hogan. During 2010, Brooke Hogan was often shown on camera at the front row and was acknowledged by commentary until eventually, in 2012, Brooke Hogan would become an on-screen character as an authority figure to the Knockouts division, and again, just like her father, she would be heavily involved in storylines, most famously her on-screen relationship with Bully Ray, where she showed the world that she cannot act whatsoever. But again, let's count our blessings one more time and say thank you, because let's all just be happy that she never got in the ring and wrestled a match. Thank you. And finally, what I believe to be the worst thing Hulk Hogan did for TNA, in my opinion, was rob it of its identity. When Hulk Hogan came in, TNA no longer felt like TNA. The roster was just a sea of former WWE guys. TV time was hogged up by a sea of old-timers such as himself, Ric Flair, Val Venus, Eric Bischoff, the Nasty Boys, and more. And the worst single decision that Hogan made, a decision that completely robbed TNA of its identity, was the removal of the six-sided ring, replacing it for a traditional four-sided ring. This was the worst thing Hogan did. I know a six-sided ring, changing it to another amount of size, changing a ring to a different shape, may not seem like such a big thing, but to me, the six-sided ring was unique. It was something I really liked, it was something the fans really liked. It made TNA stand out from other companies, and was a big factor in the toy market for TNA, so losing that ring was a big loss. I hated Hulk Hogan removing the six-sided ring, and I'm not the only one. I mean, I'm speaking for every single TNA fan. If you want any evidence that the fans were completely against this, just like I am, go and watch Genesis 2010, the first show where TNA changed back to a four-sided ring. Hogan comes out to open the show with Bischoff, and the fans are booing Hogan and chanting, "We want six sides," while Hogan is trying to give a whole speech about how change is coming, and the fans are completely booing it and resenting the change. Like, change is not a bad thing, but the changes that Hogan made for TNA were to the detriment of the company, and made TNA completely lose its identity, and it became what everyone made fun of TNA for, a failed WWE ripoff. Hating on TNA was always the cool thing. It was always the cool thing to say, oh, it's just a ripoff of WWE. But when Hulk Hogan was there, that's exactly what it was. It had a four-sided ring, nothing unique about the company. Every wrestler there who had a push was either a former WWE star or a really old guy. So that was, that's that. There were some exceptions like AJ, Samoa Joe, Sting. But for the most part, most people there were just former WWE guys. Now, before we do end the video, I think that this is something worth acknowledging. When Hulk Hogan was in TNA, despite the fact that he was making awful decisions, doing very dumb things, ratings were at a high for TNA. And I think that Hulk Hogan, bringing in guys like Ric Flair, bringing in himself, Eric Bischoff, etc., as much as they should be pushing younger stars, the fact is those guys are going to draw, and I do have to credit him for that. because obviously Ric Flair had just retired from WWE, so seeing him wrestle, hearing about him, oh, Ric Flair is still wrestling? Yeah, you switch to the other channel. When I was younger and I heard about Jeff Hardy was in another company, that's when I found out about TNA. TNA was the first wrestling show I ever went to, fun fact, and I was over the moon seeing Jeff Hardy there. Like, I never knew this company existed, so it was good on that front that they brought in a lot of the former WWE guys, but I think it was a slow burner. The effects weren't immediate. Obviously, when you have these big time stars, you get more viewers, but eventually they start to tune out when all the stupid stuff starts to happen. That's what TNA did really well, I think. They had a good casual fan base, and that was pretty much because of the fact that they had all these former WWE guys. But anyway, guys, that's about it for this video. If you did enjoy, smack the like button. Let's hit 333 likes. Again, thank you all so much for the support on the Vince Russo video. I was not expecting it to do that well. I'm intrigued to see how this one does, because I know Hulk Hogan is a very divisive topic. Well, it's not really a divisive topic. It's not a divisive topic at all, actually. Pretty much everyone agrees that he ruined the company. But yeah, this was the worst TNA ideas and decisions that were... What am I saying? This was the worst Hulk Hogan ideas and decisions that he made while in TNA. Thank you all for watching. Like and subscribe. Subscribe with notifications on. Subscribe to my second channel, link in the description. I'm bringing it back very soon. Follow me on Twitter at Thompson Wrestling. My Instagram is at I'm Tom Bell. This outro has been so long. Goodbye and keep on rolling.